World Press Freedom Day falls on the 3rd of May as a reminder to governments of the need to respect their commitment to press freedom, a day of reflection among media professionals about issues of press freedom and professional ethics, and a day of support for media workers who are the targets for the restraint or abolition of press freedom. It is also a day of remembrance for those journalists who lost their lives in the pursuit of a story. I'm grateful to the Backbench Business Committee for granting time for this debate today, which has been the first opportunity to hold since the start of the new parliamentary session. I also declare my interest as the chair of the APPG for Media Freedom, which is supported by Reporters Without Borders. This debate comes in the wake of last Sunday's hijacking of a civilian aircraft by the Belarusian government in order to kidnap the journalist Roman Protasevich, an outspoken critic of President Lukashenko's illegitimate and oppressive regime. This is one of the most audacious attacks on press freedom we have seen, but is just another example of the increasingly brazen way governments seek to oppress legitimate journalism with increasing impunity. In 2018, we saw the murder of Jamal Khashoggi by agents of the Saudi Arabian government in the grounds of their own consulate in Istanbul. In 2017, Daphne Caruana Galizia, a campaigning journalist who investigated corruption and organised crime, delved into visa for sale schemes, energy deals, and Caribbean offshore companies set up for Maltese politicians, was assassinated by a car bomb planted by a professional hitman. According to Reporters Without Borders, 50 journalists were killed around the world last year, and a further 13 already in 2021. These include Sadida Sadat and Shaznaz Rufi in Afghanistan, who worked for Aknae's TV dubbing service and were gunned down in Jalalabad in an alley as they were walking home at around 4:30 p.m. Their colleague, Mershal Wahidi, was shot in the rickshaw she had taken to go home. All 3 women were aged 20 and 21. Furthermore, in 2020, 387 journalists and media workers were held in detention. 117 of these were in China and 34 in the next highest country, Saudi Arabia. In the Philippines, in the 5 years since President Roberto Duterte came to power, 16 journalists have been killed in connection with their work, the latest of whom was beaten to death in May 2020. However, media freedom is not just being threatened by violent physical attack. We were also seeing the dubious legal procedures being used to intimidate or close down journalists. In the Philippines, Maria Ressa, the journalist and chief executive of the digital news service Rappler, has been under repeated legal attack since the election of Duterte. Rappler have tirelessly investigated human rights violations and the country's increasingly authoritarian government. And Maria Ressa, who I'm also proud to serve alongside on the real Facebook Oversight Board, currently faces 10 open charges against her, relating to 9 separate cases. Some of those are being brought retrospectively through new laws created since the alleged offences occurred. However, in this country too, our legal system is being used to intimidate legitimate journalism through lawfare, the misuse of legal systems and principles against an opponent by seeking to damage or delegitimise them, wasting their time and money. Known as SLAP, a strategic lawsuit against public participation, actions like these are intended to censor, intimidate and silence critics by burdening them with the cost of legal defence until they abandon their criticism of the opponent. The initiator of such a lawsuit does not normally expect to win, but instead to wear down the defendant until they succumb to fear, intimidation, and mounting legal costs or exhaustion, and cease their otherwise legitimate criticism. A current example is the journalist Catherine Belton, author of Putin's People, which was published last year by HarperCollins, is facing lawsuits along with her publisher, which have been filed in London by 4 Russian businessmen, including Roman Abramovich. Mr. Abramovich has also recently forced apologies from British newspapers, The Times and the Daily Mail, for stating that he gave a yacht, Le Grand Bleu, to Eugene Shivler, a Russian-American oil billionaire, despite the fact that Mr. Shivler had stated this himself in an English court proceedings on the 14th of November 2011, during the hearing of the case Bereznikov, the future of public interest journalism. The Australian government presented the News Media Bargaining Code to oblige companies like Facebook and Google to enter into commercial arrangements with the news industry to make sure they had fair remuneration for their content. It was only because they legislated to require this and to give a regulator the power to mediate and set the term of remuneration if no deal was done that Google and Facebook eventually did move. We have to consider what the role is of journalism in the digital age, where people increasingly use the internet as their primary source of news and information. The most recent Ofcom Media Nations survey published last summer, showed that around 35% of people now regularly get their news from Facebook. News media and the freedom of the press also faces a constant assault every day with the direct challenge through social media to what is now called as a derogatory term, mainstream media, seeking to persuade the public that they shouldn't believe the so-called mainstream media on anything that they write, whether it's critical or praiseworthy. To put people in a position where they simply do not know what they should believe anymore, and in the world of social media, where algorithms of engagement drive content through those platforms, often it can be the misleading or the downright lies and the conspiracy theories that gain a bigger audience and are more interesting and are actively promoted by those platforms. As this Parliament seeks to consider the online safety bill draft legislation, and then hopefully a bill later this year, we need to take into account the impact that harmful disinformation spread through social media and sometimes amplified by social media is undermining news and through that democracy itself. We need to protect journalism and the freedom of the press if we are to remain an open and democratic society. We need to recognise that those values are increasingly under attack from authoritarian governments around the world who are acting and deliberately targeting journalists, sometimes physically, sometimes emotionally, sometimes economically, but all with the intent to suppress their necessary work. And we need to ensure that our modern media landscape, driven by social media platforms and their engagement, still works to provide fair remuneration for journalists creating content. Because if journalists cannot be paid for what they do, few of them will do it. And the people that will win in that situation will be those that fear legitimate investigation and questioning. Yes, I'd like to thank all members for their participation in what has been a really excellent debate. We've heard many harrowing stories of attacks against individual journalists, many of whom have lost their lives, who are seeking to bring truth to power, to make citizens aware of abuses of power and to drive for change. And I can think just in my 11 years as a Member of Parliament, so many issues that I've been involved with either personally or as a member of and chair of the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. So many of those issues were initiated by the work of investigative journalists, bringing to the attention of Parliament and politicians serious issues that needed to be addressed. So it is a vital part of a vibrant democracy, and we should take any attack against the media and journalism anywhere in the world incredibly seriously. A number of members have raised, I'm very pleased the Minister raised in his remarks as well, the serious challenges that exist in the digital world. And it's right, as he said, that we create the infrastructure to safeguard journalism in the future, both through the operation of the online safety bill, but I think in particular through the Digital Markets Unit, and to ensure that there's not abuse of market power which will undermine media and could turn journalism into effectively a behind closed doors product that a few people pay for but many citizens are simply not exposed to at all, and that would be a terrible outcome. I would just like to, the final point I'd like to make as well, which I and others raised during the debate, particularly my friend the member for the City of Chester, is this important point about abuse of the legal system in the UK to shut down legitimate journalism and legitimate inquiry with lengthy and expensive lawsuits. We've seen examples of that, and I think that's another important area where we need to safeguard